LLE.
Okay. I found somebody totally different. I don't think this is the right person. Antonio underscore
LAVALLE.
LAVA. Help me.
I just put in a thing.
Thank you. Okay, got there's an Antonio Dot Laval too.
Really?
If you look, it's giving very, very different type of teas. Very different. Very different. Okay, Tyler, what's your story?
Okay, so I did my Fulbright in the Netherlands, hence why I'm still here. I did mine from 2018 to 19, and then I stayed a second year as a senior ETA. But I was amongst the students, grantees who were told to go home because of COVID. But I got really lucky, and I got a job teaching English here at a high school in Den Haag. And yeah, so now I'm just like working and just trying to get to know myself some more and just trying to just milk this experience, really.
And you found love there too.
Yeah, I did. It was so funny because like before going to my Fulbright, I was like really working out and I was like, oh, I'm gonna snatch myself up a Dutchman, but I was just being funny and I was like, wow, I like really did this. I like like I had no idea that I was actually going to do this, but yeah, so we've been together for a minute, like 2.5 years now.
You met during your first year.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So
congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been great. Yeah.
I was in the Netherlands in a few times. I showed at World Press Photo in 2019. So I give a talk there. I also spoke at the Black Archives in Amsterdam.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't been down there, but I've heard of it. Yeah, the Black Archives.
Oh yeah, you should hang out with them. They're super cool. The New Urban Collective. They also do like the yearly protests against Zwarte Piet and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Really
I actually didn't know about Zwarte Piet before coming here. I had to like see somebody in blackface on the street, and I was just like, no one told me about this.
That sounds very jarring.
Yeah, it was. I mean, everyone was having a great time, and I was just very, very confused.
Yeah,
very confused.
Yeah, they're crazy.
Yeah.
Do you have Instagram?
I do. I'll put it in the chat.
Chat. Would y'all have Facebook too?
My Facebook is strange. You're not going to be able to find me. Like, you can't request me, but I'll request you.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, since I'm a teacher, I don't want people, like my students, looking for me and friend requesting me.
That's real. That's real. Are you from Georgia?
So no, I'm originally from New York, born and raised, but my entire family like migrated to Georgia. I have an aunt who's been living there for like 27 years, and my mom, my brother, and my uncle went. So I was like, all right, fine, I'll join you all.
Okay, nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, Alexander, what's your story?
So I did Fulbright in 2018 to 2019, and I went to Skopje, Macedonia. So my family's from Macedonia, and so I was like, this will be a cute little moment to like go back and hang out with my friends and family back there. So I went there, and I was originally going to do a research project.
Was this before they renamed the country?
It was like during.
Oh, that's a lot going on.
Yeah, it was very interesting. So I initially was going to be doing like a research project on the social determinants of people choosing different like healing modalities for mental health. So it's looking at like pharmaceuticals versus alternative medicines. And then that didn't really pan out the way that I had hoped. So I kind of switched gears and made this research project on the queer resiliency in the face of like systemic discrimination. So it was really cool. I started working with an NGO there. I co-created Macedonia's first drag scene.
Okay, nice.
Wow. Organize Macedonia's first ever Pride.
Wow.
And then had a cute little famous moment. I was all over the tabloids and the media in Macedonia. And then 3 days later, I left because my grant was done, and I was like, it's time to go home.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you perform too? Do you perform?
Yeah. So I haven't as much since coming back to the States, just because life has been a little crazy, and then with COVID, it just not doing much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I want to again. I miss it a lot. There's something about just like having a bunch of people just like all eyes on you that I'm like, I need more of this.
Yes. Do you have Instagram?
Yes, I'll add it to the chat.
And what's your performance name?
Well, okay, so that's one of the other reasons why I haven't been performing, because I had a name and then I was like, well, I'm not feeling this anymore. And so it's been a long journey to find my new identity.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a struggle.
Yes, come through. Oh my gosh. Your face is beat. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
thank you.
Yes. Okay, nice. Okay, well, this is awesome. So I mean, I think we should probably just get started.
Yeah.
Can you give me screen share ability
Yes.
also? So let's be real, people. There are 4 of us in this room. So this is gonna be a conversation. I'm gonna walk through some things, but please, I do not want to just be sitting here talking. I can't when I look at 4 people's faces. It's not gonna work. It's not gonna work. So very, very conversational, very engaging. Ask me questions, interrupt me. We're talking. We're here. We're here together. We're making it through this experience. You all are brilliant. And I'm only getting a little exposed to your brilliance a little bit. So it's an honor to get a chance to chat with all of you. I'm just going to talk a bit about my journey, a bit about how I started doing photography. I will share my Fulbright experience, which I think really, I did a Fulbright in Taiwan in 2012. I did an ETA there, but I also, while I was there, I did a research photography project. And that really, I think, transformed my life and opened up a whole new series of doors. Now I'm a photographer and a multimedia artist. That really started with my Fulbright experience. So I'll talk through just my trajectory, my journey, give you all a sneak peek of the upcoming shows in the fall. And what I'll do though is after each, because I kind of break it up chronologically. So I'll just kind of pause after each part, questions. Or you can also just be like, no, stop. Ask questions, but I'll kind of leave that time in there so that I'm not just kind of talking endlessly. How's that sound? Sound okay? Okay, that sounds good. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, so this is me back in 2012. You know, girls try not to fall off too hard.
I was like, oh, I have to give them the sound effects.
But yes, I went to I went to Duke, and I double majored in biomedical engineering and history while I was at Duke. And this is also, you hear my social media handles, so we're kind of sharing our handles, etc. But this is also, while I was at Duke studying engineering, it was also when I began my photographic practice, my photographic journey. A bit of background on me. My family's background, I'm Nigerian, also partial Swedish heritage, grew up in the United States in Pittsburgh, and also queer. And so one of the pieces that really happened for me during college was that I felt a lot of tension between my sexuality and my African identity. And I was outed during high school, and we would go back to Nigeria every Christmas. And my freshman year of college, when we went back that year, I was actually put through a series of exorcisms due to my sexuality to drive the gay out of me. And so I was really struggling, and I kind of fell into a big spiral of anxiety and depression. And in the months that followed, it was really, really difficult point in my life. And at the end of my freshman year, I was scheduled to go to Oxford to study for the summer. And one of my friends was like, girl, we should get cameras before we go. And I was like, sure, let's get cameras. And when I picked up the camera, I felt like I found my voice again. And I continued doing photography all throughout my time during college. And that was really a huge emotional outlet for me at a moment when I felt really, really voiceless. And so one of the pieces that I learned about while I was kind of doing my early work in college was about figurative representation. And so how do we represent specifically quote unquote marginalized bodies, but specifically focusing on the Black body. And we would still go back to Nigeria every Christmas. And I would go back every time. It would be like kind of going back into that space of that trauma. But so I would take photographs in my village. My village in the east is Arondiziogu. And my vantage point began to evolve and to change. So I would photograph some of the same individuals in the same communities over time. And so this was a young boy in our village, Ikechukwu. And this is a photograph I took of him in 2009. And then this is another photograph I took of him in 2011. And so one of the things I like to point out to people is just how different of a story I was telling from my own vantage point, and what a story of the community is communicated by the images. And so here, see, it's black and white. The camera is also angled at a higher angle so that he looks smaller. It really is kind of evoking some of that kind of poverty pornography that we see within like Western media. And it's a bit of a debilitating image in terms of the way in which it communicates the potentiality of the community. This is also coming from my own vantage point, because at the time, everything I saw in that space was literally black and white because of the trauma that I had experienced there. And so I began thinking about, how do I bring in actually spaces of vitality and color? How do I kind of transfigure these spaces that have been maybe historically spaces of trauma, or bodies that have been traumatized? How do I transfigure them into vessels that are really transcendent and bring in like a more positive outlook on what's possible for those bodies? And so here you can see this is the same boy in 2011, totally different image. So again, before, this image is shot from a lower angle, so he looks larger. You could see the color, you could see that he's smiling, and that engagement as that I learned about through the image, and how my images can also retell stories about communities, was really one of the big takeaways that I learned about from my early work during college, right before I did my Fulbright. So I'll pause there for a second in case there are any questions, and then I'll kind of segue into my Fulbright experience.
Yeah, and forgive me if you already mentioned this, but did you have him pose for each photo? Like, did you know what shots you wanted to take each time that you had him pose? Or were you just experimenting, but still knowing that you wanted to tell a different story?
Yeah, so these were actually both taken more spontaneously while just walking through the village. So there is an aspect of course, he knows that I'm taking a picture of him. So I think there is a way in which he is also posing for the camera and engaging with the camera. And clearly here, you can see he's definitely posing. Here, there's also a way of an engagement with the camera. The big difference was how I was shooting him. But I think also there was, because at this point I'd been going back to the village, this is my third time in the village. So I think there's also an aspect of us being able to engage at a closer proximity, because we'd also been seeing each other for every year or so at that point. So yeah, I think it wasn't as I guess it wasn't as like me being like, okay, you go here and do this. But I do think there's that evolution in the relationship also, in terms of the level of comfort and the proximity. So I graduated in 2012, and when I graduated, I knew I did not want to do engineering. I was like, I knew I don't want to do that. And so I applied, and also I'd done an internship at McKinsey my junior summer, and I was like, I don't want to do that. So I applied for Fulbright, because when I was during my time in college, so you saw some of the Nigeria work that I did, but I also did a service project in Western China, where we were teaching Tibetan university students English and engaging with kind of Tibetan university students in Sichuan province. So I'd become interested in minority groups, quote unquote, within like China and Taiwan and thinking through like that engagement there. And and also I took photography. I did photography while I was there. So I applied for an ETA in Taiwan and I received an opportunity there. And I was stationed in two schools, but the school where I did most of my work was in the Aboriginal school in Nanao, which is in the eastern part of Taiwan. And I worked with Taiwanese Aboriginal youth there. And so a bit of context on the Taiwanese Aboriginal community. So in Taiwan, 2% of their population is indigenous, and the Taiwanese Aboriginals are the ancestors of all Polynesian people. So you can see from like Hawaii to Indonesia to Madagascar, and they all originated in Taiwan, I think several thousand years ago. And so the Taiwanese indigenous community deals with a lot of systemic discrimination. Their languages are marginalized. Their cultures are generally marginalized unless they're used for tourism. Their higher rates of like alcoholism, teenage pregnancy, et cetera. A lot of these metrics that you see in indigenous communities around the world. And so what I had an opportunity there was to work with an elementary school, and I also collaborated with a number of other Fulbright collaborators. And so there was a Fulbright senior research fellow, Professor Christine Ye from the University of San Francisco. And we worked together to create a curriculum for first and second grade Aboriginal youth at my elementary school, teaching them photography, art, Atayal, which is their ethnic group, Atayal myths, legends, and language as a space for cultural engagement. And so the thought process there was, which Professor Ye's research had been around, was that, you know, if you create a curriculum that includes the history and cultures of individuals, how can that increase long-term educational outcomes, right? If you actually see yourself reflected in the curriculum, if you see your histories reflected, how can that impact long-term educational outcomes? And so we collaborated together and then also worked with two local teachers, Nancy Yang and Jennifer Huang, working with the students over the course of a year. So we built this year-long curriculum during my ETA. And so I led the photography component of the project, and the works that the students produced was really fantastic. So this was my first time thinking through, again, this aspect of responsibility with photography, responsibility with the camera. And so I did document some of the behind the scenes, but what I found really important was, for me, rather than me telling the story of the community, I taught the students photography so they could have the tools to then tell their own story, to tell the story of their community, their families, their friends on their own terms. And so I was really shocked by the quality of the work. I mean, I'm not gonna be, these are like 7 and 8 year olds. I mean, you're like, okay, you know, we have reasonable expectations, 7, 8, but the work was fantastic. So they were each given 5 assignments. And I said, you have like 4 frames that you can use. They each had a disposable camera they were given, and they only had like 4 frames they could use for each assignment. And so the assignments included creating a self-portrait of yourself, a family portrait, a portrait of a friend, and a portrait of something that makes you proud to be Atayal, which is their indigenous group. And so Abu, who's a second grader, he produced this really stunning self-portrait of himself in his village. So again, this is just like, again, showing what actually giving the tools to a community, how they can actually tell their stories on their own terms. So here, this is a family portrait that was produced by Sayun, who is a second grader there. This is a portrait of her father. And so then we built these into multimedia projects. And so you're going to see this evoked in a lot of my future work that I do. I do a lot of multimedia, cultural and mythical engagement. And this, I think, was, now looking back, prefigured a lot of the future work to come. Professor Ye, she, who's the senior Fulbright senior fellow, had done a lot of research around Atayal myths and legends. And so we began before even going into producing images or artistic projects, we began by teaching the students about their own like mythical heritage. And so these motifs were then incorporated into these multimedia projects that we produced. So this is a self-portrait that each student produced. This is a self-portrait of Yage. And you can see, notice some of the motifs here. So for example, here, this is like this rainbow pattern. So what is this rainbow? Within Atayal mythical traditions, at the end of our lives, we walk across the rainbow to join our ancestors. And so this is the rainbow bridge that connects us from the world of the living to the land of the spirits. Also on this side, you can see these diamond motifs. And so within Atayal mythical traditions, the diamond is, these are the eyes of your ancestors watching over you. And so these are the ways in which, how do we, from a contemporary context, how do we engage with our own ancestral heritage, our own mythical traditions that connect us to our origins? Because these histories of colonization and colonialism have tried to rip them away from their origin stories. And so this was again another powerful way in which moving just from using the contemporary tool of the camera and then incorporating multimedia motifs and histories to then tell their stories. And so here, one other detail is this is their Atayal name, Yage. They also have their name in Chinese because Mandarin Chinese is the lingua franca, if you will, there. And then they also each chose an adjective in their local language that made them feel proud of themselves. And so Yage chose the word makala, which means strong. And then they also included the word in Chinese. So again, it's this kind of contemporary while also engaging with historical traditions. And then the final output from the project, we had so the project was produced between 2012 and 2013. And then with the support of the, I know they don't call it the embassy there, the outpost of the US State Department in Taiwan, we were connected to the National Taiwan Museum, and the students were then featured in a full floor exhibition at the National Taiwan Museum in 2014. So this had a chance to exhibit this body of work. And then the students came in from the village and then were there as the lead artists. And I thought that was just an amazing way in which, again, we could think about engaging with personal histories, personal narratives, and myth in particular from a multimedia artistic perspective as a way to transform our lives in the present and to transform the lives of our communities. And so there are also representatives from the Taiwanese parliament that were there. There I am. That's Professor Ye there. And this is Ryan from the State Department. And then that's Dr. Voki from Fulbright. So yeah, so this is, that was that project there. So can pause there if there are questions there, and then I'll keep moving forward.
I just think this is so dope. Like, I love what you were able to do in your grant. And before you had said at the end, I was going to ask if the students were actually able to present like their art and like how, because one thing that I noticed on my Fulbright grant in terms of being an ETA was just kind of like your willingness to like still speak in that target language, just with English. So what did you find that your students were a lot more confident because it was something that was so personal to them? And they were also able to share, something about themselves with others. But yeah, how did the presentation go for them? Like just being able to present what they created and share their stories.
Yeah, one thing that was very interesting was, particularly because I was working in elementary school, so when I was so this was a separate program that we did. This is kind of in my free time. So during ETA, we had I was working like maybe 20 or 25 hours a week actually teaching English. And so this was an extra program that I set up on Fridays for the students to come to. And so actually within those settings, Jennifer Huang, who's here, who's my LET, she was also there translating. And I also did speak to the students in Chinese a lot when I was in the class. So I was like speaking in Chinese to them to encourage them and working with them. So that also, I think, also is very different than the English class setting where it was like only in English, etc. Here, it was kind of moving between Atayal language, Chinese, and English to a lesser extent, to explain the work and also to teach them photography. So it's we're doing these little activities, etc. When at the end, when the work was actually presented, it was a very, very exciting moment. And I think one of the pieces that was also really, really nice was that with the support of the museum, the work was then able to tour around Taiwan. And so it went to then 6 other cultural spaces, including the museum that they have in their hometown. So they also then were able to then be featured there and to showcase their work in their actually hometown, in their local museum.
And then the other question I had was, so did the students get to choose their own motifs? So did they think of them on their own, or were they like given a few that they could choose from?
Yeah, so for example, here we said, okay, include like the rainbow patterns we discussed, or the diamonds, etc. And then they kind of just went and just did whatever they wanted with that kind of framework there. So it was like, okay, make sure you're including these portions or some of these motifs that we discussed in class. And then, but then they had free reign on actually how to implement them into the pieces. Here you can also say, well, this is also one of the final projects, but here this is a glimpse at one of the early projects that we did with them, where they actually had these watercolors and they all chose an Atayal adjective for themselves. And then they kind of just adorned it with any pattern that they wanted. So we kind of went from being more free form to then having a bit more structure towards the end, but still with them being the deciders on actually the implementation process.
Yeah, this is such a beautiful project. Love it.
Thanks. Yeah, I also built the pedagogical framework for the work around, there's a portion of photography known as literacy through photography, where people use photography as a way to also engage with questions of identity and teaching students. And so I use the work of Professor Wendy Ewald to actually as kind of a base for myself to then build the framework for the projects. So from there, so I returned from Taiwan in 2013. I'm like going back. I'm gonna go quicker though. I'm gonna go quicker. So I returned from Taiwan in 2013. The show was in 2014, so we came back for the show. But when I came back, I was back at home, and that brought me back into a lot of that same space that I was feeling that brought me into photography in the first place, that sense of tension between my African identity and family members and my queerness and my queer identity. And so I began working then on a documentary series on LGBT African immigrants, which I worked on between 2013 and 2019. And this series was titled Limitless Africans, and it was released as a book in 2019. There are a few copies still left in Europe, actually, but very few in the United States. But this was a documentary project where I traveled to 10 different countries across North America, Europe, and the Caribbean. And I photographed and interviewed 50 LGBT African immigrants, working to debunk the myth that it was un-African to be LGBTQ. Here, this was, again, how Fulbright really, I think, transformed my life. A few things. First of all, I never thought I was going to be a photographer or that I was going to do photography. And when I was in Fulbright, my collaborator, Professor Ye, was like, you really have a talent here. There's really something here. Nobody ever told me that before. Nobody ever told me. So I was like, maybe I should keep doing photography. I still had to get a job, all this other stuff, but I was like, it really kind of sat with me. And then also this whole mythical framework and pre-colonial histories and narratives. So one of the pieces, as we'd begun the Fulbright project with a lot of research and then teaching the students about their own Atayal histories and culture and language motifs, I also, for my Fulbright my Limitless African series, I began by doing a lot of research on pre-colonial African sexuality and gender. And one of the pieces that I also found was pre-colonial writing systems. And so in Southeastern Nigeria, we actually had a writing system prior to colonization, and this is known as Insibidi. And when I looked through the documentation of the motifs, I found this symbol. And this symbol represents 2 women lying in bed together, holding each other with pillows on either side of them. And I was really struck by that because I'd been told by members of my family for years that there was no LGBT people on the continent, that it had never existed. And then actually finding our pre-colonial writing and seeing that there was literally symbols within our writing that represented same-sex affection, was a big game changer for me. And so that became really the historical framework, the mythical framework around which I built the work in terms of its connecting it to the contemporary narratives of LGBT Africans. So just a tiny bit more there in terms of the history. What I found was there's this amazing book, if people are curious, it's titled Boy Wives and Female Husbands. And it documents, again, the presence of pre-colonial differential sexuality and gender across the African continent. And so when you open the book, there's this map. And I was like, all these different names of these ethnic groups, and each of them have documented evidence of a differential sexuality or gender identity. One of the examples come from the Hausa in northern Nigeria, which currently is under Sharia law. Homosexuality is punishable by stoning to death. But there was a group there of men who dressed as women and occupied a female role in society for centuries prior to, I guess, contemporary colonization. And they were known as the Yandaudu. And Yandaudu within Hausa language means the sons of Daudu. And Daudu is a deity, a god figure within the pre-colonial Hausa pantheon. So that was really curious for me. I was like, okay, first of all, not only there was the presence of this group, but that they were connected to a deity, to a god within the Hausa pantheon. One of the articles that I found that also was, again, another big piece in the puzzle for me, there was an interview with Malidoma Somé, who is a Dagara, you can see the Dagara here, a Dagara spiritualist from Burkina Faso. And he talked about, in 1994 interview, about how within pre-colonial African societies, people we would now identify as being LGBTQ were the guardians of the gate. And the guardians of the gate, the gatekeepers, were the people who were the shamans, the healers, the mystics, the diviners, who communicated across dimensions to heal and to communicate with ancestors and to make sure that the system of the universe was maintained and sustained within our local communities. And so we were these mystical figures that were revered within our communities, and how that's been transformed within a contemporary context. And so I began to identify my work, even as I was in Fulbright, I was kind of thinking about these myths and legends. It was really, for me, stepping into this tradition of myself as a gatekeeper, this tradition of me looking into our mystical traditions, our esoteric traditions, as a way to bring forth images that heal our contemporary society and can transfigure our understanding of what human potential can really manifest. And so these were the two aspects that we're building off of Fulbright, and that then informed the Limitless African series. I'll just share two quick images from Limitless Africans, but that was just a bit of the conceptual framework. So there, again, I was traveling, and I was working with different individuals, 50 individuals in 10 different countries. And in terms of the process, each model was, I invited them to choose their clothing and objects which made them feel whole and complete as an individual. And then we photographed in the series in and around their home. So I would travel to where they were based. And so each of the images becomes a portal, right? We enter into this portal, this universe where the gatekeeper is literally standing there and presenting themselves and their story to the world. And so this is a portrait of Brian, who was a queer Rwandan person in Montreal at the time. He's now subsequently relocated to Rwanda. And I included also with each of them their narratives. So there are more narratives on the website, limitlessafricans.com, but this is just an excerpt here about Brian's vision for what Africa can truly represent in terms of our historical spaces for LGBT people. And so again, this aspect of gatekeeping, what are these universes that we enter? When we also move through spaces and new countries, how are we also there as in our role, also transforming and transfiguring the spaces around us? And so this was a portrait with 4 queer African women in Brooklyn, New York in 2017. And I had worked previously with Maya here, and I was curious about how do we as LGBT African people also build community there's also this history that Malidoma Somé discusses of how queer people within traditional African societies would have like these yearly retreats that they would kind of go into the bush and they would do these different ceremonies. And so there's an aspect of community building, of gatekeepers working together in terms of a ceremonial and ritual process. And so this was, I'd worked with Maya previously, and then Maya had 3 other queer female friends who we then invited to then do a community portrait to explore what is the power when we come together as gatekeepers, and how do we transform the spaces around us. So that was the Limitless African series that then taught me about frame portraiture, which I then bring into my current body of work. So that's a bit of the past work, and I'm going to do a slight pause again.
Yeah, I remember seeing the image of Brian, I think, in New York Times. Was that in New York Times a few years ago?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, super beautiful image. I guess I would just love to hear your thoughts on, like the fact that it seems like a lot of these portraits and images come from a diaspora, because a lot of the African countries of origin are still pretty hostile to queerness. I know in Malawi, when I did my Fulbright there, it was illegal, which of course made dating really interesting. But that's for a different story. But what's interesting too is that I think you know, and you can also speak to this, how a lot of these individuals are now in like the Western world, or maybe Europe, maybe Canada, maybe America, but they still hold on to like an African cultural identity, despite the fact in many ways they're these like sort of multicultural hyphenated identity states. And how does that sort of like function? It just sounds like an interesting dynamic, because I'm a Black American, right? And I know some of my first generation immigrant friends identify as Black Americans versus Nigerian or Ghanaian, and just like that dynamic, especially with a cultural background that may have more homophobia tied to it as well.
Yeah, one of the reasons that all of the images were taken in diaspora was because of safety concerns that I had for each of the people who were participating in the project. I think for me, having a American passport, if I did a project like in Cameroon or in Malawi, I could take these pictures, publish them, and then people's lives can literally be ruined overnight or changed overnight. There were people who I'd also just talked with, documentary filmmakers who had done work on a queer community in Cameroon. The movie was published and when the movie came out, the NGO's headquarters was burnt to the ground, and then the people had to then flee as asylum seekers. Sorry about the dogs. People had to flee as asylum seekers to the United States, and then they were in a homeless shelter with their baby. And so I was like, okay, I don't want that to be what I'm doing to people as a photographer. And so the part of the reason was about safety concerns. And then also each individual I spoke with, I said, you need to be 110% confident and comfortable with being public, because when it's out there, it can't go back, right? And the work can really travel, et cetera. And so, because even for people in diaspora, there are still safety concerns within some of their community spaces that they have. So I think that was definitely a big contributing factor. I think it does make the work also distinct from some of the work that's been produced on the continent. So there has been work produced by, for example, Eric Gamfi in Ghana, who's done a work on LGBT Ghanaians, Zinali Maholi, of course, who I love, in South Africa, Sabella Malangani in South Africa as well, his Country Girls project. So there is that work that's produced on the continent on LGBTQ African people. And so the diaspora element does, I think, distinguish the work as well. One of the pieces that I found personally was that growing up in the United States and people telling me, oh, this is not your culture, you've been corrupted by growing up in the United States, etc. There's this additional level of dissonance and distance that you have from when people say, oh, you're un-African, right? You already are in diaspora, so there's already this sense of disconnection from home and an inability to prove, well, no, I grew up here, I grew up there, so this is not coming from this external force. So I think that diaspora element does add an additional level of complexity in the way in which we are interacting with our indigenous African identities from a space of distance. And then also there's all these other cultural elements that are coming through here, which you can see, for example, in this image. These are all first generation African immigrants in the United States, but clearly heavily influenced by Black American style and fashion. And so like even this whole fashion element of the work, you also see kind of these diasporic elements coming through in the way in which they're self-presenting. And so I think that also in terms of the way in which we talk about gatekeeping traditions and how people as queer Black people in the spaces where we're again constantly opening and moving between these dimensions and speaking to ancestors and can have these roles as mystics and diviners, but also how we're pulling in influences from the spaces where we are to then to heal those spaces as well. So I think there's that diaspora element that then comes in where within our locations, we're also transformed by the spaces and we transform the spaces around us as well.
Yeah, I just like, it's really interesting because like I'm like first gen American. And so like my parents immigrated to the States in 90. Well, my mom came in 93. My dad was here before that. But after they got married, they like moved here. And it's like this really, really interesting thing I think a lot about with diaspora, about like, it's like in my experience, it's been like a lot of diaspora is so worried about like losing their culture and losing their language that they like cling on to so many like traditions that like then going back to Macedonia, they're like, wait, y'all do that? Like we have not done that in like 40 years. Like, yeah. And y'all are like in America, right? Like y'all are supposed to be like more modern. And so it's just like, it's really, really interesting. And I think it's really cool that you highlight the diaspora experience in your work. Cause I know like for me, a lot of times being a queer Macedonian, I was like, I'm the only one. Like there's no one out there. Like there's no way, right? Like, cause nobody else talks about it. And it's just really interesting, like to see how like queerness is one of the things that like often gets like pushed out in diaspora. So I wanted to hear if like you had like any sort of like thoughts on that or experiences with that through your work.
Yeah, one of the models who I worked with, whose name is Wilo, Somali, queer Somali, grew up in Canada, also relocated to the United States. Wilo told me that within their community, they experienced also kind of this sense of, because people were so dislocated and traumatized and trying to also maintain their culture, there was almost like a time capsule element to the culture that they felt like they were holding on to, right? And I think is one of the things that's really interesting is that even in Nigeria today, for example, there is like a really famous like trans Nigerian person, Bobrisky, who is constantly on, like a trans woman who's like on all the ads and it's really famous there. But that did not necessarily exist for my parents' generation. So I think there is almost this like, even as the culture is changing on the ground within our countries, I don't think maybe our parents' generation is not exposed to that and are kind of holding on to this other memory. I think one of the other aspects, though, is that even further back is that, you know, how cultural memory is transformed and changed, because for example, that symbol that I showed at the beginning, which is this pre-colonial symbol that shows same-sex affection, right? That was recorded in 1911. So there was clearly a strong cultural indigenous memory around our indigenous queer identities that existed, even if they were not seen as queer at the time, but of same-sex affection. There was this understanding that existed in 1911 that by 1970, within my parents' generation, has been erased, right? And so I think cultural memory and the way in which we can revive cultural memory is a very important part of my work and my process in terms of connecting with history as well. And so that's part of why all of my work has history included with it, to then connect it to the contemporary, because I'm all about reviving our ancestral knowledge systems that have been really suppressed over time, particularly during the 20th and 21st centuries.
I have a question. How did your family sort of react to sort of this like amazing sort of a project, given that it sounds like there's initially not a lot of acceptance about your sexuality to go from like that to sort of showcasing queerness around the world?
Yeah, so it was very interesting because I think I didn't realize that they were along for the journey with me, because I wouldn't talk to them about it. I would just post stuff online, etc., yada, yada, yada. And so I did 2 fundraising campaigns for the work. I did a GoFundMe, and then I also did a Kickstarter campaign. And I was really surprised when I did my fundraising campaigns. I was like, oh, here's a donation from Auntie Helen. Oh, here's a donation from Uncle Obi. Here's a donation. I was like, wait, all these people donating. I was like, I didn't think you all rocked with me like this. Like, what? And so it showed that even though we were not having these conversations, they were seeing the work, they were reading the narratives, and that was also transforming them and their own perception. So I think that is one of the other parts that was really surprising with the work, was that way in which it literally was able to open up gates of healing and transformation within my own family, just by them being exposed to the narratives and the images. They came along for the ride. Some of them, not all. The ones who needed to come, they came. The other ones who did not need to come, they stayed where they need to stay, and they're staying over there. I feel, need to go, honey. They need to go. Oh my God, it's so funny. Any other questions here, or I'll just like I could segue forward to a preview, because I think it's 2, are we until 2:00, Alexander?
Yeah, we are. But
Yeah.
like, if people want to stay over, if you want to stay over, we can, but I don't want to force it.
Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just jump forward, and then I will describe a bit of my current work, and I'll just show you a little preview of stuff that's come. Real quick, short, cute, blah, 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 blah. So as you can see here, I was working a lot at this point with frame portraiture. I think one of the early questions was about, oh, was this picture posed? You can see I started to do a little posing in the early college stuff. Then with the students in Taiwan, I was doing more posing, but then they were kind of leading in. This whole series was frame portraiture, this idea of creating these gates collaboratively with each of the sitters. I then moved on to my series Infinite Essence, which is the work that you see kind of in my background as well. And so I was really affected while I was producing the Limitless African series. I was really affected by the murder of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, and how his body was left in the street for hours and then the media took pictures of his body and then shared it across the world without the consent of his family. And I kept seeing again and again these images of Black people being shot and killed. I mean, we could think of even just George Floyd last year, Philando Castile, Tamir Rice, Michael Brown. And I wanted to think about how could I, using my training as an engineer and my skills I've been developing as a photographer, particularly working with frame portraiture, how could I transfigure Black bodies from being these sites of death and state violence into these transcendent vessels of eternal life? And so for each of the images, I did a lot of testing to kind of get to the model. But in 2016, I was thinking a lot about, as I talked about these mystical ancestral traditions, my role as a gatekeeper, how I can use that to, again, move between dimensions to bring forth these images of healing. And I was reading the work of Chinua Achebe and his reflections on the Igbo notion of, one of the Igbo notions of the soul, which is the chi. And in a quote, Chinua Achebe said, "Or is the chi an infinitesimal manifestation of Chukwu's infinite essence, one ray of the boundless radiance of the sun?" And so Chukwu is the primordial creator god within the Igbo cosmos, this primordial androgynous figure that contains all genders, sexualities, all of this within this primordial blackness. And so I really sat with that one of our spiritual bodies is connected to the celestial, is connected to the divine. And each of the portraits, I began by hand painting the model's bodies with fluorescent paints. And then I hand built my own flash that only transmits ultraviolet light. And so here you can see a bit of the process. The model's body is painted, but you can't really see the paints in the visible spectrum. this is the flash that I built using my engineering background. And so then in total darkness, I click down on the shutter, and for a fraction of a second, the model's bodies are illuminated in these patterns. And so you move from the visible spectrum, where we're only really engaging within an ancient Egyptian context, for example, we had 8 spiritual bodies, and our physical body was just the most dense portion of ourselves. And so we move from the visible spectrum, where we're only seeing this physical corporeal body, to this seeing one of our spiritual bodies, to literally transfiguring Black bodies into the divine cosmic vessels that they are. And so this was the process that I then moved into from the Limitless African series, from this engagement with mysticism and legends and myths from my background at Fulbright in Taiwan, to now producing work that's in this modality. And so each of the images are also connected to myths and legends from the Dogon in Mali and the Igbo in Nigeria. And this is the only one that I will share. And then the other ones I'll just tab through just so you can see them. This is actually an African-American myth. And has anybody heard of the myth of the flying African? Throughout the United States, and particularly along the coasts of Georgia and South Carolina, there are stories that persist to this day of enslaved Africans who were able to escape bondage by taking flight and returning to their African homelands. And there are a lot of hypotheses as to the origin of this myth, but many people point to an 1803 slave rebellion on St. Simon's Island in Georgia, known as Igbo Landing, where a group of enslaved Igbo people aboard a slave ship, they overthrew their captors, they ground the ship ashore, and right when they're about to be recaptured, rather than be recaptured, they entered into a creek and they drowned themselves. And as they entered the creek, they chanted, "The water spirit brought us, the water spirit will take us home." And they accepted the protection of the Igbo high god Chukwu, and they flew home into the primordial blackness of the African creator gods. And so this is an image that's an homage to the flying Africans and these larger mythical motifs that we have. And so each of the images, again, are referencing these different myths. And then we can kind of see that now looking back, I see that as a trace that moves back all the way to my Fulbright project in Taiwan. So I will just tab through. So that's another piece that I'll share here. This is another piece from the Infinite Essence series. And then the series that's coming out in the fall is an expansion of this work. It's titled Cosmologies, and it explores in much more dramatic relief Igbo myths of origin and Dogon myths of origin. And each of these images, again, are specifically connected to our own creation stories, bringing us back to the primordial blackness. And so I've really started to focus a lot of my research on this space of this primordial androgyny from which creation emerges. Like blackness of the beginning of the universe that created all life, also contained all genders, all sexualities. It was this primordial unity that was infinite. And so all of these beings emerge, literally leap forth from that primordial androgyny and create humanity, they create the universe, and they create the entire world. And so these are some of the images that will be on display at my New York show in September at Clamp Art. And so if any of you are around, or if your family members are around, definitely tell them about it. September 17th, October 30th. The opening is on Friday, September 17th, and will run from 6 to 8 p.m. And these images will all be on display there. And in addition, I will have on display my first film that I've been working on that's co-directed with an amazing friend of mine, Marcus Red. So this is, again, thinking about and now moving into additional media with my work, all engaging around these mythical frameworks. And so the title of the work is Obi Umbu, the Primordial House. It's a 30-minute choreographed dance film, which retells an Igbo myth of the creation of the universe. And so here, I know Zoom is not so good at showing things. I'm gonna try to show you the trailer. It's like 1 minute long. And then I need to just wait. I need to get the sound to work. Share sound, optimize for video clip. I don't know if that, should I click that? Optimize for screening posts. Okay, I'll do this. Let's see if it works. Okay. And so this is the trailer. photos. And nope. And then these are some of the upcoming screenings of the film in case any of you can make it. And it'll be in New York City, Clamp Arts, on 17th, October 30th. The opening will be Friday, September 17th. I will be there for the opening. LA, there'll be a showcase there at Iris Project, November 6th to November 30th. Open reception is at November 6th, 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. And there will also be an intimate dinner at the Contemporary Art Museum Raleigh on November 14th, from 5 to 8 p.m. So that's a bit of what's been coming up. This is a bit of the journey that I've been on since Fulbright, and I am super happy to have had a chance to chat with you and connect with all of you. So thank you. Yeah, if there are any questions though, happy to answer.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say, so in looking at your website prior to contacting you, and I was looking at a lot of like the photographs that were up on there. When I first saw them, I fully thought that they were just like body painted. And then when I saw that, I think you had like some behind the scenes photos either on your website or your Instagram or somewhere. And I was like, wait, maybe this was all done in like post, like on Photoshop or something. And so to like hear that it wasn't, and like how you actually did that is honestly kind of genius and really incredible. Like I think it's super, super impressive. So like,
thanks.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, I think when people understand the work as a photograph versus as a digital painting or digital art, I think that's when people are like, oh, whoa, because within photography, within our culture, photographs are seen as representing objective truth. And so if this is the objective reality of what the Black body is, how does that challenge or enhance and expand our notion of what's possible for our body? And so that, I think, is one of the really exciting parts of explaining the process and the hand painting the model's bodies, the fluorescent paint and the fluorescent light and to then create these, bring these motifs to life. See, I love a kind of sharing the process. I like that.
I don't have a question either, but I just want to say that you are so dope. I think your art is amazing. And I just love that, I think we all can say that, yeah, like a person's art is meaningful to them, but to just hear you speak in so much detail with so much care and so much love about the work that you produce, and also taking into consideration like the people who participate in your art. I just think it's such a beautiful thing. And also to just hear your own personal journey of how you've navigated as a queer Nigerian-Swedish American Fulbrighter has been so inspiring for me. And also just like seeing how your Fulbright experience really like helped like kind of like cultivate you where you are now. You just thought like, oh, this is just a nice little hobby, and someone's like, oh no, you should really pursue it, and then you doing it. It's so amazing to see where you are right now and all of your success. And I'm so happy that through your artwork and you pursuing your dreams, that you've been able to like heal relationships with those family members who deserve it. But yeah, and so it's so great, and so I really appreciate you being here tonight.
Oh, thank you. I mean, all of you are so amazing. So I'm like, wait, let me just do my little stuff over here. So yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, and I think I don't. I probably could have still made it to this point without Fulbright, but I don't know. I mean, I can't even imagine what that route would be, because that allowed me a year to really kind of think and to work really specifically around. It was like an extra project on the side, but that really became the heart of my entire Fulbright experience. And yeah, I think it definitely transformed everything for me. So whatever things that you're thinking about and that you've been doing, you might never even come back to America. So who knows? You'll be I'll be like, Sprecher du Deutsch? No, that's all right. That's German. I apologize. Oh gosh.
Well, you see how little Dutch I know that I didn't even catch it. I was like, yeah. That's literally what I do here. I'm like, yeah. Dankjewel.
Yeah. Oh, gosh. Well, unless there's anything else, don't want to, hold y'all up from y'all lives. You know what I'm saying? You enjoy yourselves.
Yeah, I think if there's nothing else, we can let you go. Thank you for sharing your experiences and your art and everything. That's incredible. If you have any sort of like flyers or anything for any of your exhibits, send them to me and Tyler, and I'm sure we can share them on our, like on the Prism and the Noir Instagram pages.
Amazing.
Or in the area that they can stop by.
That would be amazing. Yeah, there's one for the New York show. Flyer. Yeah, flyers for shows. Okay, amazing. Yeah, I'll send you all for the September show. Would it be better to send it now? I guess probably so people can plan.
I mean, I guess in like a week or two or a week, maybe.
Okay.
I guess it's better to send now if you think you'll forget, but I think it would be, 3 weeks before, and then a week before as a reminder would be good.
Okay. Yeah. Sounds good. That's my little list over here. Thank you. That's really helpful. And yeah, and you all have my Instagram, all that stuff. So if there's anything else that comes up or you want to talk about anything, let me know.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, so great to meet you.
Nice meeting you all too. I hope we get to meet in person sometime.
Yes, well, if I ever make my way to Pittsburgh, but if you find yourself back here in the Netherlands, just let me know.
I will. And then Bay Area, Antonio. Alexander, where are you based?
Chicago.
Oh yeah, you said Chicago at the beginning. Okay. Well, we're working on a little screening tour. If you all have any like venues, let me know.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
Okay.